Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Jazz is Not What You Think, the podcast that delves deep into the world of jazz with your host, Michael Fagan. In today's episode, Michael is joined by Roxy Coss, a GRAMMY Award-Winning musician, composer, bandleader, recording artist, educator, and activist. She is a captivating force in the world of jazz. But before we dive in, we'd like to give a shout out to the sponsor of this episode, the Jazziz Vinyl Club. Picture this, jazz aficionados. As a member of the Jazziz Vinyl Club, you'll receive not one, not two, but 4 premium edition 180-gram vinyl albums carefully curated by the Jazziz editors. These albums feature tracks from jazz legends and today's top artists handpicked just for you. And here's the cherry on top. These vinyl gems will be delivered to your doorstep 4 times a year. It's like Christmas for jazz lovers all year round. But wait, there's more. Each vinyl album comes complete with liner notes penned by Jazziz writers, offering you a deeper dive into the music and the artist behind it. And let's not forget the custom design album cover that makes these vinyl albums true collector's items. So if you're ready to enrich your jazz collection with the finest tunes and exclusive vinyls, look no further than the Jazziz Vinyl Club. It's the club where music lovers and vinyl enthusiasts unite. This is Jazz Is Not What You Think.
Well, welcome. I am here today with GRAMMY Award-Winning musician, composer, band leader, recording artist, educator, and activist. And we'll talk about something very special that Roxy has founded. Roxy Coss, welcome.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Oh, it's great. Well, you know, as for those of you listening that have listened to Roxy's music before, she's had a half a dozen albums out already that have just received a lot of critical acclaim from Jazziz, from of course from our friends at Downbeat, and well deserved. Roxy, the first question I'm going to ask you is a little offbeat. Had you met Michael Brecker?
Well, yes, not super personally, but I had a pretty impactful experience with him in 8th grade at the Reno Jazz Festival. He was the guest artist there and gave this masterclass, and the room was packed. Everyone was like standing on top of each other, and it was really, really inspiring. And then him and his brother played that night, and all my friends left and went to the casino, and I was enraptured by it. So it was very inspiring. Yeah.
And the reason I ask you that question is Michael was a friend and one of my favorite players in the whole world. And when I first listened to you, I said, this woman really loves Michael Brecker because I hear some of Michael in your playing.
Well, thank you.
That's no easy feat.
Thank you.
Oh, you're quite welcome. So the last album you had, it's about a year old. I talked with my editors and they were like, well, I don't know if Roxy has a new album. I said, well, there's another reason why I want to have Roxy in this special issue that we're doing, all about women leaders. And that is your foundation, the Women in Jazz organization that you started. And, one of the questions that I've been asking, obviously the women that are featured in this issue, is that I know you're aware of a lot of the things that women deal with as players, composers, band leaders. In your experience, what trials and tribulations did you see that made it either more difficult or more challenging being a woman?
Well, I love that you're asking this question, but it's such a huge question to ask. And, I think the most important contextual answer I could give is that, for me, every single part of the music that I experience is coming through the lens of being a woman. Jazz is a very personal music about identity, and it's a social music. It's not just an art form where you practice it by yourself. So, every single encounter that we have with this music is with people. And for me, it's always been filtered through being a woman first. When I step into a space, people don't see a saxophonist, they see a female saxophonist, and so on. So, I could go on and on for hours about what the challenges have been for me personally and challenges I've seen in my peers and students and mentors. But I think it all stems from, it's within a society. our art form is reflecting on our culture and our society and is a representation of it. It doesn't mirror it exactly. I think it's a little bit skewed because this art form is something that started in a time where inequity was greater than it is now in our greater culture. And that has been passed along through mentorship and through the cultural and societal side of the music. But we still see a great underrepresentation of women. And this comes with a whole host of challenges for all of us, not just for me or my colleagues who are women identifying. It really just means that we're missing out on a lot of music we could be enjoying and experiencing, a lot of contributions that could be there. And with that comes a pressure on the women who do exist in the music. And oftentimes, there's abuses of power and stuff like that, but it all stems from the same roots.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah. Do you see that changing? I mean, as a man, I see that changing, but from your perspective, do you see that changing? And let me preface it by saying, when putting together this special issue, I sought out what I believe were some of the most talented musicians in the world who happened to be women. And it was an experience that was important for me to go through as the publisher and editor of Jazziz. Not that we don't include women. We don't think about covering whether someone in a feature or review, whether it's a man or a woman. But what I learned through this process is there are just an incredible number of talented women that are underrepresented, because these are names that I had not yet heard of. And yet when I listen to their music, it asks the question, why?
Yes, absolutely. And you're bringing up, some points that are super important in terms of the way the industry works, which is actually a whole separate issue than the music itself, right? And I think it's great that, one thing I do see changing is that people are being more intentional about including women, whether it's in coverage, in the press or radio or at venues or festivals. Also just in hiring practices, like if you're putting a band together. I think that there was an awakening in our society when the Me Too movement happened and Time's Up that caused a conversation to start happening, which is great. I have seen some, what I think is either a stall or backwards movement since the pandemic, which is unfortunate, but I think that happens with any movement. But I think now it's less excusable to not talk about it. And I'm talking, culturally, not me personally, but in our culture, it's less excusable to not address it. When there are those glaring underrepresentations, I think it's more obvious to more people, which is a great place to start. So in that way, yes, things have changed in terms of people's expectations. I know that for a lot of my younger students, they just expect better, which is great. But in many ways, no, things haven't changed. And by that, I mean, if you go to colleges with jazz programs, conservatories, serious jazz schools around the country, there are more and more programs, but the numbers are the same. When I was in college, I attended William Patterson University. I think I was one of 4 women in a department of 85, and that hasn't changed. When I visit all these departments around the country, they're the same ratio. So as much as we might see the women who do exist being represented a little bit better in a professional stage, we have to also be careful not to use those few women as tokens in order to paste over a problem that is more systemic.
Absolutely. So you have been on the live music scene, even though you're young, for quite a while. And I used to see you playing at small venues, major festivals, clubs, and then you were on Harry Connick's TV show. Where do you like to perform live? What is your favorite kind of space?
That's a great question. I mean, part of what I love is that it's always different. Um, there's something special about every performance, and part of it is that a performance is about that relationship that happens between the musician and the audience. And so, if every time it was the same, that wouldn't be the point. And so, like, I love the fact that I can play at a small club in Brooklyn or a huge performing arts center in the Midwest or a jazz festival outside in Europe. And each of those experiences is just completely different. And the music will hit the audience in a different way based on both the people in that community and the venue and the setting. So I just really love it all.
Yeah. Well, you can tell. And so the album that you put out almost a year ago, Disparate Parts, it has a lot of disparate parts. There was an interesting amount of sort of rock and hard sounds to it, and then completely the other direction, which I'm assuming is the disparate parts. There were two tracks that really stuck out. One was sort of very melodic, and beautiful, which is the one we wound up putting on our sampler. But and I think it was called Mabes. Is that pronounced correctly?
Yeah, yeah.
And the track that I listened to and Michael Brecker came to mind was a track called Eli, Minnesota.
Yes.
Where the solo on that track literally takes you to another place. It's one of the best solos I've heard in a long time. In fact, in some ways, that kind of reminded me of Wayne Shorter's approach to Steely Dan's Asia.
Oh, wow.
Where it just when you think you've hit the pinnacle, you go up again. And it happens a couple of times where when you're finally done, you're like, I know you're done, but I wish you would have kept going.
Thank you. It's great compliments. Wayne Shorter is definitely my all-time favorite hero.
Mine too.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So tell us about the track, and then tell me about the meaning behind Eli, Minnesota, because I know where Eli, Minnesota is, obviously in Minnesota, but it's this beautiful sort of place to get away. So did it have some special meaning as the title of that track?
So yeah, that composition is actually composed by our guitarist, Alex Wintz, and he was on the road, on an extended tour. And so he wrote some music based on the places that he was in. So that one for him, I think, was based on that experience. And you'd have to ask him, more personally about it. Yeah.
I'll have to ask him.
But as a band, I invited people to bring in their own compositions for this project for the first time. In the past, I'd only recorded my own compositions, and some of my arrangements of, standards and stuff like that. And that was part of the idea of the disparate parts. I wanted that compositional element to be what the band contributing as well as their solos. And I thought this tune was a great fit for the quintet. It's compositionally, I really loved it. It allows, a story to be told, but it's also really fun to blow over, as you can hear.
And you did. Really, really just wonderful. So you're still, are you still teaching at Juilliard?
Yes. Yeah. I'm in my 6th year.
Wow. And tell me about the experience of being student becomes teacher.
Well, I think as a jazz artist, we are all students of the music. That's your job for life. We don't hear about people who stop studying the music because at some point they become irrelevant. So I think our job as an artist, Wayne Shorter is the greatest example, is just how, what's the next step? What's deeper? Let's go deeper. So I feel like my job as a teacher is to instill that in students. How can they go from this institutionalized setting where we're being told what to do, what to practice, what we need work on, into the real world where you have to tell yourself those things and somehow find the motivation and the guidance to know what to work on and how to keep sticking with it, even though someone's not holding you accountable.
Wow, that's great. So what's next? So I know you're not the type of recording artist, performing artist that likes to put out an album every year because a record label wants you to. But is there another project in the works?
Yes, and I would love to be that artist. I think that, the problem is money.
Yeah,
And the industry has changed so much. But that was my model from Jeremy Pelt, who was a great mentor of mine. And,
sure.
he's like, you got to get one out every year. And,
Right.
he fortunately has the support of a label who is able to do that. So when I released Restless Idealism, Chasing the Unicorn, Future is Female, I was in that zone, and even into Quintet. They were all about a year and a half apart. And then the pandemic happened.
Right.
And with that, I had a daughter, and being a new
Congratulations.
mother, thank you. So things slowed down a little bit, but I managed to get that last one out. So I'm going to try to keep on it, because I think part of releasing records is, yes, about keeping your audience engaged and having material to, be interested for people to book your band and get, shows and all of that. But I think for the artist, more so, it's for me personally about just documenting where I'm at and giving
Mhm.
myself something to work towards. And, like I said, holding yourself accountable. For me, a big part of my practice is composition. So having something to work towards, with a deadline, and kind of just like, here's my goal. I want to put this new project into the world, gives me some sense of focus and kind of like, okay, what am I mulling over right now in life? How can I translate it into the music and give it to people in a way that keeps developing my own relationship with the music, and allows a space for me to make music, because I think as a band leader, you have to make your own space for the music,
Mhm.
So I am working on something. Uh, I'm planning to release in a slightly different way on this next cycle.
Okay.
Yeah, but look for something in the next year for sure.
Okay. Yeah, because you mentioned something about, because I was in the record label business, and it was about putting out an album every year. And one of the things that my friend, miss him dearly, Tommy LaPuma, once taught me, he said, the problem with the record label business and recording artists is that we sign these artists that we want them to come out with an album every year, and there are a lot of artists that don't have a lot of music in them that can't put out an album every year, but they put one out every year. And when you have something to say, it's the opposite. I'd like you'd probably want to put more than one album out a year, and it all has to do with money and funding, and how do we get this project, not only recorded and produced and get out there to reach an audience. and
Yeah.
and that's the interesting sort of caveat, or the corollary to that is, I see a lot of recording artists now coming out with tracks instead of albums, because while the AOR, the album oriented repertoire, is something that I certainly grew up with. Um, the audience is very interested in hearing something new, even if it's not a whole album. Have you ever considered that?
Yeah, I mean, you guessed it in terms of what my plan is. But
I
I
read your mind.
yeah, and I think it's because we all know the way the world is going. And in a past time, I've heard the stories about, artists getting huge advances from record labels and actually getting paid to make records, a novel
Mhm.
concept for my generation.
Yep.
Um, and now it's costing musicians a ton of money to release, even if they have support from a label. Oftentimes, it's kind of still a DIY model, and so then you're either funding that through other work like performance, teaching, or you're finding grant money, or
Mhm.
piecemealing this stuff together. So then you're spending a ton of your time just trying to make the money. So then it's harder to get the music together, right? Because you have less time.
Sure.
So I think doing singles is a great way, or doing digital releases, because it just cuts the cost a lot. And um, the way that we're consuming, I mean, I can barely sell 5 CDs on a gig, whereas even 10, 15 years ago, I could sell a lot more. So I think, people, I don't buy CDs anymore, and I think most people don't. And so we have to rethink how we're releasing, and I think also for the industry to think about the pressure that is put on the artist to create a CD when they can't really sell them, so
Yep.
we're paying for something that is just going to sit on a DJ shelf, which is appreciated, but
Right.
is the radio station going to pay for that? I don't know.
Right. No, the models absolutely change. And so what I'm hoping is that I'm on your list to get that track as soon as it comes out, because I've listened to all your work and I'm waiting for more.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. You'll be the first to know.
Thank you so much. Well,
Yeah.
It was great to have you on the show, and
Yeah, thank you.
let's definitely stay in touch.
Absolutely. Thank
All
you for
right.
all you're
Well,
doing.
thank you for all you're doing. All right. Till then.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.